What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected directors sits down for what should have been a routine interview, only to walk straight into an ambush that reveals the toxic underbelly of daytime television? Ron Howard, the mind behind cinematic masterpieces like Apollo 13, A Beautiful Mind, and Rush, arrived on The View expecting to discuss his latest project. Instead, he found himself locked in a verbal cage match with Joy Behar, whose relentless jabs and twisted logic were enough to push even the calmest filmmaker to his breaking point. This is the story of how a beloved director's composure cracked live on national television, and why millions watched one of the most uncomfortable talk show moments in recent history. Before we dive in, be sure to hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments what you think about media ambush interviews. The green room at ABC Studios buzzed with the usual pre-show energy. Ron Howard adjusted his tie, glancing over the talking points his publicist had prepared. The interview was supposed to focus on his upcoming film, a heartfelt drama about small-town America already generating Oscar buzz. He'd done hundreds of interviews over his decades-long career, from his days as Opie Taylor to directing some of Hollywood's biggest hits. The View should have been a cakewalk. "Mr. Howard, we're ready for you." A production assistant appeared with a clipboard. Ron followed her through the winding hallways, past framed photos of celebrity guests and unforgettable moments from the show's history. The audience applauded as the hosts took their seats at the familiar semicircular table. Whoopi Goldberg's voice boomed through the speakers as she introduced him. "Our next guest needs no introduction. He's been entertaining us for over 50 years. First as an actor, and now as one of Hollywood's most successful directors. Please welcome Ron Howard." The audience erupted. Ron stepped onto the set with his signature warm smile, waving to the crowd and shaking hands with the hosts before settling into his chair. The studio lights felt unusually hot, but he chalked it up to nerves. This film meant a lot to him. "Ron, thank you so much for being here," Whoopi began with genuine warmth. "I've been a fan since the Andy Griffith Show." "Thank you, Whoopi," Ron replied. "Those were magical times, and I feel incredibly lucky to have grown up in front of America's eyes." Sarah Haynes leaned forward, bright and engaged. "Your new film explores themes of community and resilience. What drew you to this story?" Ron's eyes lit up. "In today's divided world, I think we forget how much we have in common. This story reminded me of the America I grew up in, where neighbors helped each other regardless of politics or background." That's when Joy Behar cut in. "That's interesting, Ron," she said sharply, prompting the other hosts to glance her way. "You talk about the America you grew up in like it was some kind of paradise. But wasn't that the same America that was segregated, where women couldn't open bank accounts, and where being anything other than straight, white, and Christian made you a second-class citizen?" The temperature in the studio seemed to drop instantly. Ron blinked, caught off guard. "Well, Joy, I don't want to romanticize the past. Every era has its challenges, and we've made tremendous progress as a progress people like you fought against every step of the way." Joy snapped, her voice rising. "Let's be honest about what you're really saying. When you talk about the good old days, you're talking about a time when people like you had all the power and everyone else knew their place." The audience shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the friendly interview they expected. From the wings, Ron's publicist looked ready to faint. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Ron said, still composed but visibly confused. "I was simply talking about community spirit, how neighbors used to look out for each other. That doesn't have anything to do with politics or social hierarchies." Ron tried to keep his voice steady, but Joy leaned back in her chair with a satisfied smirk. "Everything is political, Ron, especially when someone with your platform starts getting nostalgic about the past. You can't separate art from politics, and you can't separate nostalgia from the reality of who was suffering while you were enjoying your perfect childhood." Sonny Hostin tried to step in, sensing the conversation was spiraling. "Joy, I think Ron is just trying to talk about his film. No, let him answer, Joy snapped, her focus locked on Ron, who looked increasingly uncomfortable. I want to know if Ron Howard thinks the civil rights movement was just people complaining about the good old days he's so fond of remembering. Ron's jaw tightened, the slightest crack in decades of media training. This wasn't just a hard question. It was a trap designed to corner him no matter how he responded. Joy, with all due respect, he said carefully, you're putting words in my mouth. I've always supported civil rights, women's rights, equality for all people. My films consistently promote inclusion and understanding. Have they, though? Joy pressed, clearly enjoying the tension. Or are they just feel-good stories that make white audiences feel better about themselves without actually challenging anything? The other hosts exchanged uneasy glances. Even Whoopi, known for asking direct questions, seemed taken aback by Joy's relentless attack. Ron inhaled deeply, trying to regain control. If you look at my work, From a Beautiful Mind to 13 Lives, you'll see stories about human resilience and people coming together to overcome challenges. Those aren't partisan messages. They're human messages. Human messages, Joy repeated with disdain. That's code for not wanting to rock the boat. That's the luxury of privilege, Ron. You get to make movies about how wonderful humanity can be, while real people are out there fighting for their basic rights. The audience was silent now, the earlier warmth gone completely. Ron's hands tightened on the arms of his chair, the first real sign his patience was wearing thin. When he spoke again, his tone had a firmer edge rarely heard from the soft-spoken director. Joy, I'm not sure what you're trying to accomplish, but you seem determined to paint me as some kind of villain for making films that bring people together. That's not privilege. That's experience. Joy's eyes lit up at his pushback, like a predator sensing weakened prey. Experience? You mean the experience of growing up as a white male in Hollywood? The experience of never having to fight for a seat at the table because it was handed to you from day one? I started working when I was 6 years old, Ron said, still composed but visibly strained. I've been in this industry for over 50 years. I've watched it evolve. I've hired diverse crews and told inclusive stories, more than most directors of my generation. Most directors of your generation, Joy echoed mockingly. Do you hear yourself? You're grading on a curve, Ron. Saying you're better than other old white men isn't exactly raising the bar. Whoopi finally stepped in, her voice low with warning. Joy, maybe we should talk about the actual film. No, I think this conversation is overdue, Joy shot back, never looking away from Ron. Hollywood loves to congratulate itself for tiny steps forward while ignoring the real systemic problems. Ron Howard is the poster child for that mindset. Ron's knuckles whitened as he gripped the chair. What exactly do you want me to say, Joy? That I'm sorry for having a successful career? That I should apologize for telling stories audiences connect with? I want you to acknowledge reality, Joy fired back. I want you to admit your success came at the expense of countless talented people who never got a chance because they didn't look like you or have your connections. That's incredibly unfair, Ron said, his voice finally rising. I've worked hard every day of my life. I've treated everyone with respect, and I've used my platform to tell meaningful stories. Joy laughed, a sharp cutting sound that sliced through the studio. Worked hard. You went from child actor to successful director without ever having to prove yourself the way a woman or a person of color would have had to. You think that's hard work? The other hosts sat frozen, watching their colleague dismantle one of Hollywood's most respected figures. Sarah Haynes looked like she wanted to disappear, under the table, while Sunny Hostin stared down at her notes, clearly uncomfortable with where things had gone. I proved myself every single day, Ron said, his voice tight with controlled anger. Every film I made had to stand on its own merits. Nobody handed me anything after I turned 18 and aged out of child roles. Right, Joy said, dripping sarcasm, because Hollywood is just so fair and merit-based. Tell me, Ron, how many female directors have you recommended for jobs? How many people of color did you mentor? I've mentored dozens of young filmmakers, Ron started, but Joy cut him off immediately. How many? Names? Numbers. If you're going to claim you're not part of the problem, you'd better have evidence. Ron stared at her, his face reddening. I don't have to justify my entire career to you, Joy. This is supposed to be an interview about my new film, not a trial. Everything is a trial when you've benefited from an unfair system, Joy snapped. You don't just get to show up, promote your feel-good movie, and pretend the industry that made you rich hasn't shut out entire groups of people for decades. I never pretended anything, Ron said, his restraint thinning. But I'm not going to apologize for working hard and being successful. If you have an issue with the industry, take it up with the industry, not with individual artists trying to tell meaningful stories. Joy leaned forward, her tone dropping into something colder. You are the industry, Ron. You and people like you are the gatekeepers who decide which stories get told and who gets to tell them. When you make a movie about small-town America, whose small town is that? Whose experience are you presenting? I'm talking about universal human experiences, Ron replied, though his voice had begun to show cracks. Universal, Joy repeated slowly, almost mocking the word. Another code word. Universal means whatever white audiences can relate to. If it were truly universal, the stories would include everyone, not just the sanitized version that makes suburban moviegoers comfortable. Ron shook his head, frustrated. You're twisting everything. I've made films about gay mathematicians, black jazz musicians, working-class heroes. How is that sanitized? You made movies about those people for white audiences, Joy shot back. There's a difference between representation and exploitation. When you tell someone else's story, who profits? Who gets to decide how their story is framed? The audience remained silent, caught between fascination and discomfort, as one of America's nicest, least controversial celebrities was being carved apart on live television. Ron Howard, 5 decades with a spotless public record, was now being painted as the embodiment of Hollywood's deepest flaws. I profit because I'm the director, Ron said, his patience fracturing. But so do the actors, the crew, the editors, everyone who works on the film. That's how the business works. The business, Joy repeated with disgust. It always comes back to business with you. Never art, never social responsibility, just profit. Making money off other people's stories while congratulating yourself for being inclusive. Ron's face was bright red now, his composure hanging by a thread. Joy, I don't know what you want from me. Should I stop making movies? Should I give away all my money? What would actually satisfy you? I want honesty, Joy shot back, raising her voice to match his. I want you to admit your entire career was built on a system that prioritizes people who look like you. And I want you to stop pretending that making feel-good movies is some kind of noble public service. My movies have entertained millions and created jobs for thousands, Ron said, his voice trembling with anger. If that's not a public service, then I don't know what is. Joy slammed her hand on the table, making the entire panel jump. Entertainment isn't enough anymore, Ron. Not when people are dying. Not when democracy is under attack, Joy fired back. Not when basic human rights are being stripped away. Your comfort food movies are part of the problem because they let people pretend everything's fine when it clearly isn't. The tension on set spiked. The other hosts finally realized the interview had gone completely off the rails. Whoopi attempted once more to calm things down. Joy, I think we need to take a breath. No, Joy snapped, eyes locked on Ron Howard's increasingly furious face. "I want to hear him defend making movies that tell people everything is going to be okay when everything is clearly not okay." Ron suddenly pushed himself up from his chair, the abrupt movement drawing a shocked gasp from the studio audience. His face was red, his hands trembled slightly. He was done holding back. For the first time in his 50-year career, the famously gentle America's Sweetheart director had reached his breaking point. "You know what, Joy?" he said, voice shaking but still carrying that familiar cadence from his Mayberry days. "I came here to talk about a film that celebrates the best in people. Instead, I've spent 20 minutes being attacked and having my character shredded by someone with an obvious agenda." Joy's eyes gleamed. She knew she'd cracked him. "Oh, now I have an agenda. What is it, Ron? Holding privileged white men accountable?" "Your agenda," Ron shot back, pointing at her, "is tearing people down so you can feel important. You don't care about accountability. You care about being the smartest person in the room, even if you have to destroy someone's reputation to get there." The other hosts sat frozen. Whoopi's mouth hung open. Sarah Haynes looked ready to sink into the floor. This wasn't political debate anymore. This was personal warfare, broadcast live to millions. "Destroying your reputation," Joy scoffed. "Your reputation was built on a lie. The lie that talent alone got you here, that the system is fair. You're the poster child for white mediocrity being rewarded." Ron's jaw locked so hard the muscles in his cheeks twitched. "White mediocrity? I've won Academy Awards. My films have grossed billions. I've employed thousands and told stories that touched millions of lives. If that's mediocrity to you, then your standards are so impossibly high no one could ever meet them." "Those awards were handed to you by other white men," Joy shot back, rising to match him. "Those billions came from an audience trained to see people like you as the default. You think that makes you special?" Ron stepped toward her, fists clenched at his sides. "What makes me special is that I've dedicated my entire life to my craft. I've treated everyone I've worked with respect. I've never had a scandal, never mistreated anyone, never abused my position. But apparently none of that matters, because I was born with the wrong skin color." "There it is," Joy said triumphantly, clapping her hands. "The white victim card. Poor Ron Howard, held accountable for his privilege." "This isn't about privilege," Ron erupted, his voice echoing across the studio. "This is about you being a bitter, angry person who gets her kicks from tearing down successful people. You couldn't make it as a comedian, so now you make a living attacking others." The audience gasped. Joy's face went pale, then flushed crimson. Ron Howard, the man who had never publicly said a cruel word, had just landed a brutal personal blow on live TV. "How dare you?" Joy whispered, her voice shaking. "How dare I what?" Ron replied, now eerily calm. "Tell the truth? You dish it out for a living, Joy." "But apparently you can't take it," Joy shot back. "You want to talk about failed careers? Let's talk about yours. You were a mediocre stand-up comic who turned outrage into a job." Whoopi finally tried to intervene. "Ron, maybe we should all—" "No, Whoopi," Ron cut in, eyes never leaving Joy. "I'm done stepping back. I'm done being polite while people like her use their platforms to spread poison." He turned fully toward Joy. "You want to know what's wrong with America? It's not people telling stories. It's people like you who think tearing someone down is the same as lifting others up." Joy's hands trembled, her on-air composure cracking. "You don't know anything about me or what I've accomplished. I know you've spent the last 30 minutes trying to destroy someone's reputation simply because you don't like that they're successful," Ron said. "And I know you turned a conversation about art into a personal attack. Millions of people just watched the real Joy Behar, and it wasn't pretty." Sarah Haynes tried to salvage what was left. "Maybe we can talk about the actual film now." "There's no point," Ron said, already angled toward the stage exit. "This was never about the film. It was about Joy proving she's morally superior. Congratulations, Joy. You ambushed a guest who came here in good faith. I hope it was worth it. That's right, Joy shouted after him. Run away! That's what privileged people do when they're confronted with reality. Ron stopped. Slowly, he turned back. The studio fell silent. Only the soft hum of the cameras could be heard. Reality, Ron said quietly. The reality is that I spent 50 years earning respect through hard work and treating people well. The reality is that you've survived by being cruel and calling it honesty. And the reality is that after today, everyone will know exactly who the real problem is. Get out! Joy screamed, pointing toward the exit. Just get out! I was already leaving, Ron replied, adjusting his jacket with controlled dignity. Good luck explaining this to your producers. As he walked off, the audience erupted into a confused mix of applause and murmurs. Some cheered him for standing up to what many saw as bullying. Others were stunned by the total collapse of professionalism they'd just witnessed. Joy remained at the table, chest heaving, hair slightly disheveled. The other hosts stared ahead, unsure what to do. Whoopi finally looked into the camera. "We'll be right back after this commercial break," she said, her voice strained. The red lights blinked off. Joy sank into her chair, realization beginning to hit. She had pushed too far. She had taken a respected director and turned him into a sympathetic figure, while making herself look like the aggressor. The other hosts avoided eye contact as production assistants rushed around the set. In the wings, producers frantically made calls, already knowing the footage would explode across social media within minutes. Joy Behar had gotten the confrontation she wanted, but at a cost that would follow her for the rest of her career. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the building, Ron Howard calmly removed his microphone, accepted apologies from staff, and walked out with his reputation not only intact, but strengthened by his willingness to finally push back against the toxic culture of daytime confrontation. The View would go on without him. But the damage was done. And everyone watching knew exactly who had won.